Alright, welcome to part 3 of my Death Stranding commentary. Part 3 picks up at the exact same spot that part 2 ends, but there has been a time lapse of, it's later in the day and it's raining. And because I wasn't going to show him walking back to where he started, I just did a cross dissolve. So remember earlier when I was like, well, if you can't resolve it, dissolve it? That's basically exactly what I did. Also edited for time, because, I'm not going to show him walking back. This conversation, I probably cut out the first half of it because who knows what they were talking about, but I kept what I deemed to be plot relevant. Now, this episode is going to be rather heavy on cutscenes for probably the first 15 to 20 minutes. I still did micro edits within the cutscenes, and I did skip, entire dialogue chunks or dialogue trees. But for the last 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to basically take over almost entirely on the gameplay side, which I'll discuss as we get, closer and closer to that. Here, he's going to plug into the baby, and we're going to get the second cliff scene, I want to say. And on average, there's pretty much one cliff scene per episode. Sometimes there's two, but all of this cliff stuff is going to make perfect sense at episode 10. And literally in the last 15 minutes, you're going to know why you were looking at all this stuff. And it's definitely quite profound the way this whole thing wraps up. Because basically all of these random things with the monsters, all of these random cutscenes you're seeing that seem really out of order and disjointed, will literally come together and be tied up in this perfect little package or bow or knot or whatever you want to call it, which I'm very impressed with. Still, though, it's a hard sell for general audiences to watch something for 5 hours and be confused. Because my entire miniseries is like about 5.5 to 6 hours. And keep in mind that everyone else's Death Stranding videos where they're like, oh, I put all the cutscenes together, those videos are all over 10 hours. So, I'm very pleased that mine is 5.5 to 6 hours. Looks a lot better. It's definitely streamlined. But yeah, technically, a lot of this editing was kind of decided for me. So the goal of this episode, which I had kind of laid out ahead of time, I had the luxury of playing through this entire game before mapping out how I was going to do my miniseries. And the nice thing about this episode is that I had a very specific goal of actually get the adventure going. So I felt like the first two episodes were just introducing the world and the rules, and I feel like my goal for this third episode was to introduce the point of it all, or I guess the mission or the adventure. So I basically felt like if I could get Sam on his adventure by part 3, which keep in mind we're basically at the 1 hour mark if you were watching this in order, I really wanted the 1 hour mark to start basically explaining to the audience what is going to happen for the rest of this adventure. What is the point of this adventure? What is the goal? You know, if it was Lord of the Rings, this episode would be the equivalent of the Council of Elrond, where it's like, okay, we're gonna destroy the ring, we gotta take it to this place. That is the point of this whole series. So that was definitely the goal of episode 3, and this is a rather nice edit. I must have skipped some scenes to get it to go from that beach scene to this. Those beach scenes will also make sense, actually, by the end of this franchise or series. So anything that seems random in the early parts of the game are actually not random, and they will come together at the end. And yeah, this is where you as the audience is like, it's the woman in those beach scenes when I was a child. Like, what is going on? And yeah, they did such a good job on her face, man. Her face modeling is such a fantastic job. She could eat some more sandwiches, put on a little meat, but her face, it's just immaculate. She has much better hair than the other girl. She does not have the Hillary Clinton haircut. This scene is going to be a major exposition dump, so We have 10 minutes of basically solid exposition. It's kind of one of those things where I'm not quite certain if it's interesting or boring, but it's definitely necessary because this is where you basically get told what the goal of the game is going to be, what the mission is going to be, what that will entail. You get introduced to one of the main bad guys, which is a terrorist group, and you're going to meet the leader of the terrorist group in the next episode. So, even though this is an exposition heavy sequence, it's definitely necessary because it sets up the adventure and it sets up one of the main villains. This game has, in my opinion, how do I phrase it? This game technically has three villains in it, but really it kind of only has one, and really this guy is probably the actual villain. But technically the game has three villains. But anyway, this scene will set up the adventure and will set up, future characters. But it is definitely an exposition scene. I actually don't think I edited this scene down at all. So this is probably one of the few cutscenes that I didn't really mess with. And because there's just kind of no way to cut anything. Like I feel like everything they talked about in this scene, I did need the audience to know and understand. And I mean, at least it's a visually interesting scene. And it's the first time you meet Amelie. I mean, technically she's in hologram form, but it's the first time you meet Amelie not on the beach. So, and I guess this stuff is maybe visually interesting at least. But yeah, in about 5 to 10 minutes, we're gonna go to gameplay, and then it's pretty much just gonna stay on gameplay, and it's gonna finish the episode out. So, this episode, once again, I mentioned in the last commentary that I kind of wanted every episode to have something rather melancholy and something rather horrifying. And I do feel like this episode has a couple of horrifying things, and it also ends melancholy. Or I would argue it ends happy, but my wife would argue that it ends melancholy. But I definitely think the ending of this episode has a rather emotional, resonant ending that I'm very pleased with. And the nice thing about episode 3 is that at this point I'm hitting everything on full throttle. Like I've figured everything out, and the episodes, in my opinion, just improve and improve and improve, like all the way to the end. So if you even remotely thought the first two episodes were good, I feel like, dude, by the time you get to episode 3, it is just money. And yeah, it really is. This is the main villain. They don't tell you his name, but I want to say his name is Higgs. And we're going to meet him pretty early on in episode 4 in a boss fight. But I'll discuss that when we get to that part. But yeah, that's why a lot of this stuff was definitely necessary. Had to keep this scene in. No way to cut it down. Now, as far as the musical sequences in this episode, we're gonna have two musical sequences for like probably the last third of this episode. But they're both very different, and they both look very different, and they're both about different things, and I feel like it works pretty well. The first musical sequence in this episode, I'm a huge fan of, but then also the second musical sequence in this episode, I am a huge fan of. I'm not really a huge fan of the musical sequence in the fourth episode, but I'll discuss the whys of that when we get there. But just know that this is the last episode that has two songs in it, because the first three episodes each have two like pop songs from Low Roar in them, and this is the last one that does that. At this point on, every episode will pretty much just have one song, and it's not that I was running out of songs, but it was that you'll see when we get there. But there just wasn't a reason for it. Like I didn't need to have two walking montages in every single episode. But these first three episodes, to have the plot make sense, I definitely needed them. So just know that that's gonna happen later, where we're gonna start having just one song and one montage. That being said, there's an amazing montage in episode 7. There's an amazing montage in episode 9. I feel like debatably the best montage is in episode 10, but it's definitely debatable. Um, Although I don't know, man, this one's really good. My mother personally likes the montage in this episode. She thinks that this episode ends with the best musical montage out of all of them. Whereas I have a soft spot for episode 7 and episode 10. Because episode 10 was my last montage in the finale, and I was like, oh my goodness, I gotta get this right. So, this is where we get the plot, and the whole point of the plot, or not the plot, but this is where we get the mission for the adventure. And the point of the mission is that Sam needs to travel from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast to save his sister Amelie from the terrorists who have her held captive. And along the way, he's going to deliver packages and basically build the chiral network, which is like a super internet 2.0. And he needs to build the super internet 2.0 so that, this post-apocalyptic world can start working together and communicating. The chiral network in this game is basically the internet mixed with magical 3D printing. So once you're connected to the chiral network, you could literally print out like vehicles out of pretty much nothing. So it's basically the internet mixed with the 3D printer, but you don't need to actually have like the 3D printer plastic on site. It'll just kind of happen out of like, the nether realm, whatever. And yeah, Sam being a classical hero is definitely very reluctant. And yeah, this scene also needed to stay. Because normally I would have just cut from him leaving the room and just getting on with it, but I had to keep this scene in because this character gives him back the baby. And so there would have been a continuity error, or it would have been confusing to not keep this scene in. But if I could cut a scene or cut dialogue, I would, because I wanted this to be as brisk and as concise as possible. So yeah, that's basically why I kept this extra 2 to 3 minute scene, because I actually didn't like Sam's dialogue or line reading in this scene, but I had to keep it in just so that you could see that, okay, the baby's okay, and they're going to give him back the baby. This hard cut to the beach is what the game did, so this was not my decision. The game basically, I mean, I could have entirely cut this scene out, but I kept it in because this scene is, I feel like it's, I don't know, like, I decided that when I was going to make this series that I was really going to focus on Sam and everything that revolved around Sam, which the game doesn't necessarily do. And I felt like, well, my Death Stranding series is going to be basically about Sam's adventure and the things that matter most in that adventure. So like a lot of the side characters that are not his family members, I just got rid of. And yeah, not that I want to talk about these graphics, but man, these graphics are so good. I can read the detail on his shirt where it tells you like his blood type and other information like underneath Porter. And yeah, I find these dead whales to be rather haunting. Um, and yeah, this is where they talk about, being stranded on the beach. So you don't really know how the beaches work at this point in the story, but you kind of know that the beaches are not the normal world or the real world. You kind of realize at this point that the beaches are something else. They're like limbo or in between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But all of these beach scenes with him and Amelie kind of have a very surreal, otherworldly, dreamlike approach, which is definitely appropriate for what ends up happening in the story. Now this scene is going to end with a precognition of the finale of the game. Uh, it's also going to have her dress change colors to gray, which I don't know what that symbolizes. It's going to do a hard cut to red. That was not my call. That was how this game handled the cutscene. So I don't know why her dress changes color like that. But I know that this scene is going to end with a hint of the finale. So you're going to see the background with like the sun and kind of it's going to look crazy beautiful, and just know that that's going to come back at the very end of episode 9 and pretty much the first half of episode 10. Yeah, this. So this is something where when you're first playing the game, you have no idea what you're looking at, and you have no idea why you're looking at this or what any of this means. But just know that by the end of the game, this is all going to make perfect sense, which is part of the magic of Death Stranding, is that all of this chaotic, crazy surrealism is actually going to make perfect sense by the end. And no, the answer is not going to be, it was all a dream. You know, not at all. Okay, so for this scene, I definitely edited out some dialogue, trimmed this scene down. This is probably like a 10-minute scene that I was able to trim down to about 5 minutes. And then this scene is we're going to basically start entering my gameplay with my musical montages and some action scenes. There's going to be a couple action scenes, and we're going to see the mechanics of how the internet is created as well. So this is basically the final push to get Sam to agree to do the adventure, because remember that Sam is a reluctant hero who doesn't want to do it, but he decides he's going to do it, and only because he's going to do it to save his sister. Which right now, we as the audience are very confused about his sister, because we're like, why do we see her when we're a little boy and she's the same age? And then also we're like grown up and she's the same age. And then the nature of the dialogue where, they're like, she hasn't aged a day, but you look so much older, Sam. So like we know something is really weird. Granted, everything's weird in this game, but there's something particularly weird about Amelie, and that's going to be a major it's going to be a major plot revelation later as to what's going on with her. But yeah, at this point, Sam has agreed to do the mission. He ties his hair in that ponytail. Now, if I had my way, I think his hair looks much better down, and it would have been nice if the game let me control his haircut. The game just lets you basically control ponytail or hat, and I didn't want to go with the hat because I found the hat was probably too distracting. Even though I definitely played with the hat my first playthrough, but this time for my series, I was like, okay, we'll just go with the ponytail. Once again, the soundtrack's original score is kicking in. It's definitely a nice track. Um, that's one nice thing about this game is that like when I was making it, I didn't have a shortage of music to draw from. I had like 30 pop songs. I had over 2 hours of original score, so like I had a lot of music to work with. And so in later episodes when I don't use pop songs, I still inserted the score. Like episode 8 is crazy with score. Like I have so much score that I inserted into like dialogue scenes and fight scenes because I felt like it just elevated everything. But I gotta try to let me stay on track with part three. I keep getting ahead of myself, but I'm like, let's just stay on part three. What I'm really pleased about with part three, once again, is the two musical montages, and then certain decisions about the beginning, the middle, and the end, and also the fact that at this point we're not even an hour and a half into the series, but I have essentially achieved all of my first act goals. Which was like introduce the world, get the intro out of the way, including the burial of his mother, and then get him on his adventure. And I'm very surprised that we're, an hour and 15 minutes into this series, and like we've accomplished so much. Because if you were playing this game with like a no commentary playthrough, we would literally be at hour 7.5 right now. And so I feel like, dude, we're barely over 1 hour, and yet we've trimmed out like 6 hours of menus and walking and shenanigans. So I feel like this is about as efficient as you could do it, and it's also better looking than anything else I've seen on YouTube as far as like this Death Stranding game is concerned. So what's gonna happen is in about 1 minute, Sam's gonna get in the elevator. He's gonna plug into the baby. We're gonna see the second cliff scene of this episode, which will be the final cliff scene of this episode. And then we're going to start hearing intense violins, and that's when the musical montage is about to kick in. Now, what makes this musical montage different than all the previous ones is that this one is edited to the actual, like, percussive beats of the song. So, we're gonna start actually getting, like, camera cuts in line with, like, drum hits or piano keys. And that's, I mean, basically, not every song in my series does that, but this is one of those songs where I feel like the editing, actually, technically, in these actually both the songs in this episode, the camera cuts are edited to the music, which did not necessarily happen with the previous episodes. So I feel like not only did the musical sequences get filmed a lot better, they're telling a story, and the actual editing mixed with the visuals are much more cohesive. And that's what I meant earlier when I was like, by the time I get to episode 3, like I had really nailed how to film this and how to edit it and how to plan around the HUD. Although there is an intense shot in this musical sequence that gets ruined because of the HUD. I'll explain when it happens because it drives me nuts. I was like halfway through this beautiful shot and then I had to do a hard cut because the HUD came in, and it was not my intention. So I'll show where that is because I know I've been complaining about, this would have looked better if I didn't have to edit around the HUD, but truly it would have. So yeah, here you can hear the violins. Yeah, perfectly to the visuals. This shot I'm a huge fan of. And also you'll hear that when the piano keys come down, we're going to do a hard cut to the next shot, right? So yeah, at this point I'm just like, man, it's beautiful. Like it's just beautiful. I feel like I was definitely hitting everything on all cylinders. We're going to have a shot of Sam looking down at the timefall flowers, and then we're going to have a reverse shot. Stare at the bottom of the frame, and you'll see like the grass peeking up and dying, and I could have just stared at this shot for, I filmed this for minutes, and it's a beautiful shot. So the point of this montage was to show that it's really dangerous to travel, and so I showed this dangerous stuff in a montage form, and I just showed that the whole point of this was to show that it wasn't just him walking to a destination. It was him walking. It was him running. It was him dealing with the rain. It was him dealing with the monsters. And it was basically trying to show like this is not easy. Even though it's the very beginning of the journey, you're like, it is super dangerous out there. And this shot is fantastic. I feel like this is an improved version of the ending sequence from part 2 because it's similar, but we're gonna basically just kind of move on, and it's not the entire point of this sequence, but it was just like the middle part to show that, like, yes, it's a struggle. Now this reverse shot coming up got completely ruined because the HUD. So you're gonna notice the camera panning to the right, and my whole point was to keep the camera panning, but it cuts halfway through the shot because of the HUD. So this shot would have kept going, and it was looking perfect until the HUD came up, and then I had to cut, and I was so upset. But that's why there's a cut to the back of his body. That shot was supposed to be one continuous shot, but then the HUD came up, and I had to edit around it. And so, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's one of those, like, thanks Kojima, like, it's really cool that you don't let me turn the HUD off. Sarcasm. But yeah, I mean, this would have looked a lot better had I been able to fully turn the HUD off. If you can't resolve it, dissolve it. So that scene goes on for way too long, and I was just like, let's just do a cross dissolve and cut to the main point of this. So what's going to happen in this scene is that he's going to connect the internet up to this area. And for a lot of the future times that we show this, it's in a musical montage or just very quickly gone over. But I felt like, well, the first time he connects to the internet, we should probably show it in most of its entirety. That way people know, like, why is he taking the necklace off? What is going on? So I thought that, well, I have to show what it looks like to connect the internet up at least once. And if you wonder why the camera's zooming in and having, like, hard cuts, it's because, much like the car scene from part 1 where you have to keep moving the camera, otherwise that, hey, use the right thumbstick to control the camera. That's why I have to keep moving the camera even for these hologram scenes. Because if I don't keep moving the camera, then the heads-up display will turn on telling me to move the camera, and it's super obnoxious. But that's why for even these hologram scenes I have to move the camera rather erratically, which is not what I would do if I could, fully have the HUD turned off. So here we have another cross dissolve, and we're going to have him traveling for a bit, and he's going to encounter more BTs. Now, we're getting close to the end of part 3, and so my whole idea for this was that every single time we have encountered the BTs, it's been kind of a train wreck, if you think about it. Like, people have been dying, Sam has been running from his life from, like, this, demonic Moby Dick whale. And so, because I'm in control of this action sequence, I could basically get caught and have another, running sequence, or I could have him sneak through. And so my idea for this one was to have him sneak through, and the whole point of that was to show that he's improving. The idea of like him and the baby are starting to hit kind of like synergy. So the whole point of this sequence was just to be tension inducing, but not to have him get caught and not to have it actually be a fight scene. I just wanted it to be the threat of a fight scene. So a lot of this sequence is me walking into camera for extended periods of time, which is not easy because you have to plan out where the rock's going to be and, how are you going to do this. And yeah, so the whole point of this sequence was once again just to add stress and tension, but to not get caught. And then also to see how close could I get to getting caught without getting caught. Which I think I do a pretty good job. It's coming up right here where Sam's going to do a little circle, and I tried to basically drag it out as much as possible because I wanted it to be like as close. I wanted it to be the closest call possible. So how it works is if those black puddles grab you, it's on, like you're on a serious boss fight. So you need to not have those like black puddle footsteps get closer to you. And I basically tried to see like how close can I get these things to get to me for a dramatic effect. And this is how close I got, which I'm very pleased with. Yeah, dude, that's good. That's real good. Real close is the point. So we're about to enter our last. We're about to enter a short cutscene and then another musical montage. So what happens in this cutscene is that now the baby malfunctions, and Sam is worried about it, and the guy on the radio tells him, hey, just get to a distribution center, we can connect him to the internet and fix him. And so then we go into a song. And at this point, I had pretty much mastered filming these walking montages, so you'll notice that for this montage that's about to come up, the camera is super low looking up at him, which is pretty much how all the montages go from here on out, and most of the fight scenes go from here on out. So see how the camera is really close to the ground looking up at him? That's really how that's how you should film a video game, that's how you should film a movie. You don't want to film things at shoulder level, you want to film things low looking up. And yeah, the way the grass looks in the foreground, the background, everything about it, it really came together nicely. This song is also fantastic. The background looks good, the framing looks good. This sequence is going to end, there's 2 shower scenes in my entire miniseries. This one's going to end with a shower scene. I had stolen footage hours after this point in the game, hours later, I had stolen some footage of like a Hartman conversation that wasn't going to make the final cut, but I used the footage of him walking around listening to Hartman to imply that, he was walking around worried about the baby, and it came out really nice. And if you're wondering why there was a reverse shot right there, it was because of the HUD. When I walked past that like blue holographic line, the HUD came on, so I had to edit around that by doing a reverse shot. I did this water thing on purpose to show that, everything is a struggle, everything's difficult, even getting across a river is difficult. This shot's beautiful. The shot where I enter this distribution center, this is pretty much as good as anyone could ever do it. So notice that he's running into camera, and then the camera's going to almost do a full 360 pan to the right, and it's going to end on the console that he's walking to. And so yeah, it tracks the laser beams, and then the camera's going to stop right about here, ready to go for this console coming up. Also, much like the previous musical montage, there's like stuff edited to the music. So you're gonna notice a fluorescent light coming on perfectly in cue with the music. That was not an accident, that was entirely on purpose. So wait for it. Yeah, that. Yeah, that makes me happy. Like having these little things like perfectly edited with the music. It's one of those things where, yeah, I have a hard time imagining someone doing this better on YouTube. Like, good luck, man. Good luck if you want to make a Death Stranding video that looks better than this one. You could do a longer version of mine, because I cut out some subplots and stuff, but as far as editing to the music and having, you know, all of these shots come together, like, man, good luck. Because I wouldn't want to try to do this again, personally. So yeah, when I say this whole series of, like, this whole series took me over 200 hours, I'm like, yeah, no exaggeration. But if you want it to look this nicely and have it be this cohesive, like, that's how difficult it was. Yeah, I gotta not listen to it. I could literally just stop and watch this and listen to it. So yeah, the next shot that's coming up is hours later in the game that has nothing to do with this sequence, but when you edit them together, it's wonderful. Like, I love that shot of his back walking out of the shower, and then he looks over, and then the baby blink is to the music. Yeah, perfectly to the music. And this is basically the end of part 3. And know that part 4 is going to start with some crazy action sequences. We're going to get really crazy in part 4. And, you know, all the future episodes, like, we're going to start getting crazy.